Hello and welcome to Unacademy. This is the last lap. With few days left for the prelims examination, today we will discuss 25 polity MCQs. Tomorrow we will discuss 25 more. These are two very important and crucial sessions for you. So please attend these two sessions and you will realize that by watching these two videos, you will be able to approach the prelims examination with confidence. And that's what you need to do. You have done all the hard work. Now, what you need to do is to approach this examination with confidence, with supreme confidence. And then there is no power on earth that can stop you from writing the mains examination. Clear? But there are a few things. One, either you are watching this session live, so solve these questions with me live, or you may be watching the recordings of the live session. Now, there are two things. Either take a look at the question, pause the video, arrive at an answer, move this video forward, and find out what is the answer to this question. That's one approach. Second, just take a look at the question. Don't answer. I will be solving these questions myself. And you will also realize what is the mindset that I'm following, I'm using to arrive at an answer. Maybe that mindset you can embrace and use that mindset to attempt polity questions on 24th of May. Clear? I think you should follow the third approach. Take a look at this question and see how I am arriving at an answer. Great. Let's get started. But before we start, after the prelims examination, immediately after that, my polity batch is coming on Unacademy Platinum. If your target is 2026 prelims, I hope and I pray you don't have to appear and attend the platinum sessions. But if you are attempting prelims in 2027 or beyond, consider Unacademy Platinum, the batch which is going to launch immediately after the prelims examination, and we will start with Indian polity. Let's get started and let's look at question number 1. When the Constitution of India came into force on 26th of January 1950, the preamble described India as, Preamble, we the people of India, having solemnly resolved to constitute India into a sovereign, socialist, secular, democratic republic. But socialist and secular, these were the terms which were added later by the 42nd Constitutional Amendment Act 1976. So it can't be C. So it is sovereign, democratic, republic. So B is the right answer. Clear? Question number 2. Which part of the Indian Constitution summarizes the ideals, objectives, and philosophy of the Constitution makers? Preamble is used to unlock the minds of the makers of the Constitution. That's what the Supreme Court said in the Birubari Union case. So preamble in nutshell, and there is another judgment of the court where the Supreme Court said preamble in nutshell contains the ideals and the philosophy of the Constitution. So the answer to this question is C. C is the right answer. Question number 3. Which of the following statements is correct about the legal status of the preamble? It cannot be amended. It can be amended, but subject to basic structure. And that's how preamble was amended in 1976. In fact, the matter was in the court as well. It is not a part of the Constitution. In Birubari Union case, Supreme Court said preamble is not part of the Constitution. But then in Keshavananda Bharati case, Supreme Court said it is part of the Constitution. In fact, the last item which was added to the Constitution was the preamble. It has independent enforceable legal powers. Preamble is not enforceable in a court of law. It serves as a guiding principle for interpretation of the Constitution. That's correct. Because what is the significance of the preamble if it is not enforceable in a court of law? Preamble is invoked, preamble is used to interpret the provisions of the Constitution and the laws when they are ambiguous. For example, how did the Supreme Court arrive in 2017 that right to privacy is an integral component of Article 21? Supreme Court said, look at the preamble. One of the objectives of the Constitution, as mentioned in the preamble, is the dignity of an individual. And this dignity cannot be assured unless and until you have privacy. So that is how we are using, or the courts can use preamble to interpret the provisions of the Constitution. So D is the right answer. Clear? Done. Question number 4. A constitutional government differs from an arbitrary government because what is a constitutional government? Constitutionalism. Government which is limited by the terms of the Constitution. The powers available with the state are not unlimited. There is a limitation on the powers of the state. An arbitrary government is what? Arbitrary government where there is no limit on the powers of the government. Government can do anything. How does this constitutional government differ from an arbitrary government? It allows the head of the state to make any law. It is limited by the terms of the Constitution. This can be the right answer. It is always federal government. Not necessarily. Even if it's a unitary government, but there is a limitation, unitary constitution, but there is a limitation imposed on this government by the Constitution, then it's a constitutional government. It always has a ceremonial president. Does that mean a presidential form of government is arbitrary and can be arbitrary? So C and D cannot be the answer. It allows the head of the state to make any law. When we say any law, that means there is no limit on the head of the state to make a law, which means this law can be arbitrary as well. It can be violative of the principles of the natural justice as well. So A also cannot be the answer. B is the answer. It is limited by the terms of the Constitution. Constitutionalism. So 4B is the right answer. Are you solving them? Great. Which of the following features is a characteristic of the federal structure in the Indian Constitution? Federal structure, there is no definition per se of federalism. Then what do? We compare the Constitution or Indian Constitution with the Constitution of United States. If it matches, it's a federal constitution. If it doesn't, then it is something else. The union and state governments derive their authority directly from the Constitution. Maybe, yes, important feature. All states have uniform powers and equal status in the federal system. But that is not a characteristic of federal structure in Indian Constitution because there are some states which have special status. For example, special status under Article 371. So all states have equal powers or equal status in the federal system? Not necessarily. This is what we call asymmetric federalism in India. State legislatures can amend the Constitution independently. State legislatures can't even propose a constitutional amendment. The center has exclusive control over all taxation matters? No. There are states which have their own taxation powers. So union and state governments derive their authority directly from the Constitution, yes, which means state governments are not subservient to the union government. Both union government and state governments, they enjoy their authority from the Constitution, derive their powers from the Constitution. And that's what we say, dual government is a feature of federalism. One government at the center, one government in the states. Distribution of powers between union list, state list, concurrent list. So question number 5, A is the right answer. Are you solving them? Great. Question number 6. Which one of the following provisions indicates the federal nature of Indian Constitution? The appointment of governors by the President of India. The governor is appointed by the union government, by the president, in a state which can be ruled by the opposition as well. So the very existence of this post governor, we can say it is a centralizing tendency of Indian federalism. So this can't be the answer. The existence of an independent election commission for conducting elections. Independent election commission, yes, but then the same independent election commission is common for both state elections as well as central elections. So this is also one feature of unitary bias in Federal Constitution of India. The distribution of legislative powers through union, state and concurrent list, maybe. The provision for All India services under the union control. All India services is, we can say, violative of the principles of the federalism. If not violative, then against the true federal character. Why? Because these All India Service Officers, IAS, IPS, Forest Service Officers, appointed by the union government, they can be dismissed or removed by the union government, but they work in the states. That is how there were various states, various commissions which recommended that the state should be allowed to come out of All India services, because this is a unitary feature of Indian federalism. So the distribution of legislative powers through union, state and concurrent list, I think C is the right answer. Question number 6, C is the right answer. Right? Great. Question number 7. Which characteristic demonstrates the federal principle in India's constitutional framework? States cannot be abolished or their boundaries altered without parliamentary legislation. States cannot be abolished or their boundaries altered without parliamentary legislation, but that is a unitary feature. Article 3 of the Constitution. The union government has residuary powers to legislate on unlisted subjects. This is also what we say unitary bias, which means if there is an item which does not find mention in union list, state list, concurrent list, then who has the power to legislate on that subject? It's the union. Both center and states have separate sources of revenue as per the Constitution. Maybe the president can impose president's rule in states under emergency provisions. This again is a unitary feature of our federal system. Which characteristic demonstrates the federal principle in India's constitutional framework? Which means both center and states have separate sources of revenue as per the Constitution. There are some items on which states can impose taxes, some items on which union can impose taxes. So C is the right answer. Question number 8. Which of the following best distinguishes a parliamentary system from a presidential system? In a parliamentary system, the executive is directly elected by the people for a fixed term. But that's not a feature of a federal parliamentary system. Because in parliamentary system, there is no fixed term for the executive, because there is this no confidence motion which can be introduced and the government can lose power at any time. In a parliamentary system, the executive is collectively responsible to the legislature and remains in office as long as it enjoys the majority support. Maybe this is the right answer. Let's look at other options. In a parliamentary system, the head of the state and head of the government are always the same person. In a parliamentary system, head of the state is the president, head of the government is the prime minister. Are they the same person? No, C cannot be the answer. In a parliamentary system, the legislature has no power to pass a vote of no confidence against the government. That's the feature of a parliamentary system. Parliamentary system means Council of Ministers are collectively responsible to the Lok Sabha, the lower house of the Indian Parliament. So this is not the answer. In parliamentary system, Council of Ministers means executive is collectively responsible to the legislature and remains in office as long as it enjoys the majority support. B is the right answer. But sir, legislature also includes the Rajya Sabha. But Council of Ministers are not collectively responsible to the Rajya Sabha. So how can B be the answer? This is where you need to understand that if there are 4 options and 3 options are completely incorrect, you don't have to just search for the correct answer. You have to search for the most appropriate answer under the given circumstances, which can be the most appropriate answer to a given question. So B is the right answer. If it was mentioned in parliamentary system, the government is accountable to the people. Is the statement incorrect? The statement is correct. Government means executive. To people indirectly through their representatives directly elected in the Lok Sabha. So 8, question number 8, B is the right answer. Right? Great. Question number 9, the principle of collective responsibility in a parliamentary system means what? All ministers must belong to the same political party as the Prime Minister. Then what leaves us with what happens to a coalition government when there are different political parties which form the government? Mr. Chirag Paswan is not from the same party as Mr. Modi. A cannot be the answer. The Council of Ministers is collectively responsible to the Parliament and must resign if it loses majority support. Maybe yes. Every decision of the government requires unanimous approval of all cabinet ministers. There can be disagreement in cabinet meetings. This is where then if there is a disagreement in cabinet meetings, the majority decision prevails, the majority opinion prevails. So it does not have to be unanimous. Ministers are individually answerable only to the Prime Minister, not to the Parliament. Ministers are individually answerable, responsible to the President. And they are collectively responsible to the Parliament. So B is the right answer. Question number 10. Which of the following is a fundamental characteristic of the parliamentary form of government? Complete separation of powers between legislature and the executive. In a presidential form of government, there is a complete watertight separation of powers, executive, legislature, judiciary. But in a parliamentary form of government, executive is drawn from the legislature. So there is no complete separation of powers. Fixed tenure for the government regardless of its support in the legislature? No. Why we embraced parliamentary form of government? Dr. Ambedkar said we wanted to focus more on accountability rather than stability. If you want to focus on stability, then you should have opted for a presidential form of government. The government is accountable to a house which is directly elected by the people, which is Lok Sabha or Legislative Assembly. Maybe C is the right answer. Direct election of the head of the government by universal adult franchise. Direct election of the head of the government by universal adult franchise. Is there a direct election of the head of the government? We don't elect the Prime Minister. We elect the MPs. And then these MPs collectively decide who is going to be the Prime Minister. So it is C, which is the right answer. Question number 10, C is the right answer. Very good. Question number 11, again, just look at the PYQs and see how many times this question on parliamentary form of government, parliamentary democracy has been asked. In a parliamentary system, a vote of no confidence passed by the legislature would result in immediate dissolution of the legislature and fresh elections. It is not necessary that whenever a no confidence motion is passed against the Prime Minister or against the Chief Minister, then it follows what? The dissolution of the state legislature or the dissolution of the Lok Sabha? No. Maybe from the same legislature, now we will have a new government. We will have a new Chief Minister. We will have a new Prime Minister. The government either resigning or advising dissolution of the legislature. Maybe the government has to resign if no confidence motion is passed. Or it will advise the president dissolve the legislative assembly. That doesn't mean that the president is bound to dissolve the Lok Sabha or the governor is bound to dissolve the legislative assembly, but the government is advising. Let's look at the other options. Removal of individual ministers, but the government continues. No. But sir, the government continues also. Because if there is a vote of no confidence, maybe the Prime Minister continues to function or the Chief Minister continues to function. Yes, but they act as caretaker Chief Ministers or a caretaker Prime Minister. A referendum to decide whether the government should continue. There is no referendum in India. So B is the right answer. The government either resigning or advising dissolution of the legislature. So question number 11, B is the right answer. Great. Question number 12. Which of the following fundamental rights is or are available to both citizens and non-citizens? Both citizens as well as non-citizens. Which are the fundamental rights which are exclusively available to the citizens? We have fundamental rights under Article 15, 16, 19, 29 and 30. So freedom of speech and expression comes under Article 19, so it is not the right answer. Right against exploitation is under Article 23 and 24. Right to constitutional remedies under Article 32, available to aliens as well as citizens. Right to freedom of religion also under Article 25. So which of the fundamental rights is or are available to both citizens and non-citizens? So 2, 3, 4, C is the right answer. Question number 12, C. Very good. Let's look at question number 13. Consider the following statements regarding Article 32 of the Constitution. It is the right to constitutional remedies and is considered the heart and soul of the Constitution. Yes, it is the right to constitutional remedy, but whether it is heart and soul of the Constitution depends upon whose views are you considering. Dr. Ambedkar, for example, said, which is the fundamental of all fundamental rights, that's Article 32. Although there are constitutional experts which say Article 21 is the heart and soul of the Constitution. But let it be. Let's look at statement 2. The Supreme Court can refuse to entertain a petition under Article 32 if an alternative remedy is available. Just look at the news. Whenever somebody approaches the Supreme Court, let's say filing a habeas corpus or for bail, the court says approach the High Court because there is an alternative remedy available. The Supreme Court can is the word here, refuse to entertain a petition under Article 32 if an alternative remedy is available. Yes, the courts have done that. The right guaranteed under Article 32 cannot be suspended under any circumstance. No fundamental right is suspended, technically, but their enforcement is suspended. And which are these fundamental rights which can be, their enforceability can be suspended during emergency? Every fundamental right barring 20 and 21. So the right guaranteed under Article 32 cannot be suspended under any circumstance. What if there is a national emergency? Your fundamental rights under Article 19(1)(a) are suspended. Which means if your fundamental rights are violated, you cannot approach the Supreme Court under Article 32. Or if your right to religion is violated. Or if any other fundamental right except 20 and 21 are violated, you cannot go to the court under Article 32 during the period of emergency. So this is not correct. 1 and 2, B is the right answer. Question number 13, B is the right answer. Great. Question number 14. Which of the following are not fundamental duties under Article 51, capital A? Are not fundamental duties. This is where you need to recall the acronym that I had given you. ACU, DVD. If you are an SSP, you will go for public relations and ultimately you will win. To pay taxes regularly and honestly. This was suggested, but it was not made part of the fundamental duties. To protect and improve the natural environment, wildlife, forests, and have compassion for wildlife, living creatures. To develop scientific temper, humanism, and spirit of inquiry and reform. To cast vote in Indian elections. This is not a fundamental duty. To promote social justice. Is it or is it not? To promote social justice, it is a directive principle of the state policy. So 2 and 3 are fundamental duties, but the question is asking which of the following are not. So you have to be careful while reading the question. Which are not? So I've crossed 1, 4, 5. 1, 4, 5. C is the right answer. Question number 14, C is the right answer. Which article of the Constitution deals with amendment procedure? Power of the Parliament to amend the Constitution and the procedure, therefore, is mentioned under Article 368 of the Constitution. Such type of questions have been asked. So if it is an easy question, there will be easy questions, purely factual questions. And you will hardly take 10-15 seconds to arrive at an answer. So there are such questions which do appear. Which article of the Constitution deals with right against adverse effects of climate change? In Ranjit Singh case, what did the Supreme Court say? Right against adverse effects of climate change is a fundamental right under Article 14 and 21. Not only Article 21, 14 as well as 21. This was a case related to the preservation of the Great Indian Bustard, and you know what the case was all about. So question number 16, C is the right answer. Question number 17, consider the following statements about amendment of the Constitution, which means Article 368. A Constitution Amendment Bill must be passed by both Houses of the Parliament by a special majority. A Constitutional Amendment Bill must be passed by both Houses of Parliament by a special majority. Yes. Special majority is more than 2/3 of the members present and voting, and by the majority of the total membership of the House. If there is a disagreement between the two houses, a joint sitting can be called to resolve the deadlock. There is no joint sitting when it comes to a constitutional amendment bill. The president cannot withhold assent to a constitutional amendment bill. This is also correct. Why? 24th Constitutional Amendment Act 1971. Whenever a constitutional amendment bill is presented to the president shall give assent. She has no other option. So the president cannot withhold assent to a constitutional amendment bill. Correct. So 1 and 3, B is the right answer. Question number 17, B. What are you marking? B. Very good. Question number 18. Which of the following amendments require ratification by at least half of the state legislatures? So if you have to amend the constitution, there are some constitutional amendments there are some changes which you can make to the constitution, and these changes shall not be deemed as an amendment to the constitution, which means you can make these changes by simple majority. There are some where you require special majority, but there are some federal features. If you try to amend them, you need ratification of the states. Amendment related to the election of the president, you need ratification because this is considered to be the federal feature. Amendment related to fundamental rights, no, you don't. Amendment related to representation of the states in the Rajya Sabha, yes, Schedule 4. But yes, here you have to keep in mind, if the law is passed under Article 2 and 3, then there will be changes to Schedule 1 and Schedule 4, but those changes are incidental, coincidental, and they do not fall under constitutional amendment. But if you are randomly amending Schedule 4, you need ratification by the states. Amendment related to the 7th schedule, which is the distribution of powers, a federal feature. So 1, 3, 4, C is the right answer. Question number 18, C is the right answer. Question number 19, consider the following directive principles. Okay, which of the above are Gandhian principles enshrined in the directive principles? First thing you have to keep in mind, is it asking according to the constitution? No, because according to constitution does not categorize DPSPs into Gandhian, liberal intellectual, socialist. But it is asking which of the above are Gandhian principles enshrined in the directive principles. If it was mentioned according to constitution, then none of the above is the answers. But none of the above is not an option either. So organization of village panchayats. India lives in the villages. The state shall organize village panchayats and empower them with powers so as to enable them to function as units of rural local self-government. Article 44, Article 44 Uniform Civil Code. It is liberal intellectual. Separation of judiciary from executive. It's a liberal intellectual. Promotion of international peace and security. It is liberal intellectual under Article 51. So one only, A is the right answer. Question number 19, A is the right answer. Good job. Question number 20. Article 21, consider the following statements. Right to life and personal liberty cannot be suspended even during a national emergency. Yes, Article 20 and 21 cannot be suspended. Cannot be suspended. Article 20 cannot be suspended during emergency. Yes. Article 19 is automatically suspended during a national emergency imposed on the grounds of armed rebellion. No. If emergency is imposed on the grounds of war or external aggression, then Article 19's enforcement is automatically suspended. If it is imposed on the grounds of armed rebellion, then the president will have to issue an order and suspend its enforceability. So 1 and 2, C is the right answer. Question number 20, C is the right answer. Very good. Question number 21. Which of the following special powers have been conferred on the Rajya Sabha by the Constitution of India? To empower the government to take over the responsibility of a state when there is a breakdown of constitutional machinery in that state. When there is a breakdown of constitutional machinery in a state, president's rule is imposed under Article 356. But does Rajya Sabha have to empower the president for that? No. It's based on the report of the governor or even otherwise. To pass a resolution empowering the parliament to make laws on the state list and to create one or more all India services. Maybe. To amend the election procedure of the president and to determine the pension of the president after his retirement. To amend the election of the president, that's a constitutional amendment. To determine the functions of the CAG, for that a law has to be passed by both houses of the parliament. So it is B. To pass a resolution empowering the parliament to make laws in the state list if it is expedient in national interest, and to create one or more all India services. These are special powers. Our question number 21, B is the right answer. Question 22. If the election of the President of India is declared void by the Supreme Court, okay, all acts done by him or her in the performance of duties of his or her office of the President before the date of the election remain valid. Yes, they remain valid. Elections for the post of the President of India cannot be postponed on the grounds that some legislative assemblies have been dissolved and elections are yet to take place, which means legislative assemblies, they are part of the electoral college. If there is any vacancy in the electoral college, that is not a ground for the postponement of the elections of the President. This is something the court has said during the Rajasthan case. So elections for the post of President of India cannot be postponed on the grounds that some legislative assemblies have been dissolved and elections are yet to take place. Correct. When a bill is presented to the President of India, the Constitution does not prescribe time limits within which he or she has to declare his or her assent. Correct. Regardless of what the court has said in the Tamil Nadu case, Constitution does not prescribe time limit. So how many statements are correct? C, all the statements are correct. Question number 22, C is the right answer. Question number 23. Consider the following statement. The President of India can summon a session of Parliament at such a place as he or she thinks fit. Yes. The Constitution of India provides for 3 sessions of the Parliament in a year, and it is not mandatory to conduct all the 3 sessions. The Constitution does not provide for 3 sessions. These sessions are provided in the rules. Budget session, monsoon session, winter session. There can be special sessions. The only requirement is that the time gap between the last day of the previous session and the first day of the next session should not be more than 6 months. There is a minimum number of days that the Parliament is required to meet in a year. There is a minimum number. There is no minimum. There is no minimum number of days that the Parliament is required to meet in a year. So how many statements are correct? A, 1 only is the right answer. Last 2 questions. Which of the following are the immediate consequences of the proclamation of the President's rule in a state? Immediate consequences. Immediately, what will happen? Dissolution of the state legislative assembly? No. Because when President's rule is imposed in a state, the legislative assembly is kept under suspended animation. It is not dissolved. Take a look at the Manipur case. When there was President's rule imposed, or before that Maharashtra case, does that mean the legislative assembly is immediately dissolved? No. Removal of the Council of Ministers in the state? Yes, absolutely. Immediate consequence is the casualty in Chief Minister and Council of Ministers. Dissolution of local bodies. Local bodies have got nothing to do with President's rule. Even if there is a President's rule, local bodies will continue. So select the correct course from above, from below. C, 2 only is the right answer. Last question. The Parliament of India exercises control over the functions of the Council of Ministers through Parliament of India exercises control, which means legislature exercises control over the executive through union budget. Yes, if union budget is not passed, executive will have to resign. Motions, yes. Impeachment of the president. There is no article in the Constitution which makes President accountable to the Parliament for the actions of the ministers, because ministers are collectively responsible to the Lok Sabha. So if impeachment of the President takes place, how is that an control over the Council of Ministers? It can be a control over the executive, but not Council of Ministers per se. So 3 is not the answer. 1 and 2, B is the right answer. Question number 25, B is the right answer. With this, we come to the end of the session. If this was of any help to you, do let me know in the comment section, and do not forget to like this session. I'll see you again tomorrow, same time, with 25 even more important, crucial, PYQ-oriented MCQs. Till then, have a great time. All the best. Stay safe. Stay confident. Stay calm. You will crack it.